You made a haunted house out of your own flesh and bones. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you. I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa, and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Join us as we continue our new series where we get very meta about horror movies. This time, we are discussing Silvia Moreno-Garcia's Silver Nitrate.
So, listeners, I am going to be kicking us off here in our discussion. First things first, I'm sure you noticed from our introductions of ourselves that Matt is not with us tonight. We were not able to get our schedules to mesh up, but he will be back. We miss having him in the conversation, of course, but Lisa and I are going to be doing this discussion of Silvia Moreno-Garcia's Silver Nitrate, which is kind of our first example in our new series we're calling Let's All Go to the Movies, where we're getting a little meta with films and talking about the way films, movies, movie theaters, these sorts of products and experiences play within other horror media, whether that's film or books. And so right now we're talking about a book, which is Silvia Moreno-Garcia's Silver Nitrate. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background about the book. I'm going to talk a bit about the title of the book, and then do a short summary and give my first impressions, and then pass things to Lisa for her first impressions, and we can talk a bit about how Silver Nitrate works with this theme that we're carrying through right now. So I just want to say, first off, Silvia Moreno-Garcia is a contemporary horror writer working now. She has several novels out there, short stories, etc. We have talked about her on the Monster She Wrote podcast. We have specifically talked about, in one episode, her book Mexican Gothic, which I love. And in another episode, we talked about her recent book, The Bewitching, which I also very much enjoy. I have also read her The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. And so Silver Nitrate, I think, would be my fourth book of hers. This book came out in 2024 from Del Rey. And before I get into a quick summary and my impressions of it, I want to talk just a little bit about the title, Silver Nitrate. And we'll talk a bit about why it's important in the book itself. But this is something that I think we've mentioned before on the podcast, because when we did our found footage series, we talked about Gemma Files's book, Experimental Film, which was published in 2015. And if I'm remembering correctly, there was a point in the plot where the idea of the fragility and also dangerousness of silver nitrate film was very important. And so silver nitrate was used from around the late 1800s to the mid 20th century in film stock. So the actual celluloid. It made a high contrast luminosity. So in the book, the characters talk about when they finally see the silver nitrate film playing, that there's almost like a not a distraction, but like a glittery, shimmery effect in the black and white. Like it makes a contrast stronger. Um, you know, in descriptions, it seems like it kind of just makes things sharper in a way. But the chemical itself is extremely volatile, extremely dangerous, flammable, and it needs special storage. So that's why, if you read the book, you know that our director who's keeping this silver nitrate footage is keeping it in a freezer. You have to keep it at a specific temperature. It's very unstable. So of course, this was replaced by safer materials. But there is a history of fires reported from as far back as in the late 19th century, late 1800s, in Paris in particular, when a film showing burned with people watching the film. There have also been storage facilities and vaults that have burned. The characters talk about different vaults in the book, like museums and archives that have burned or taken damage. In Mexico City, where they are. So that comes from actual history. And so, of course, this was the loss of many films, especially the older silent ones, possibly forever, especially if there was no other copy. So, sometimes some places like museums or archives will do showings of nitrate films, but it is very rare. And Lisa noted that you can find more information if you're really interested in this from the British Film Institute. So that might be something to look into if you are a movie nerd. But part of the kind of thematic importance of silver nitrate in this book is that it becomes kind of a medium for magic and the occult, but also its dangerousness. The fact that it is so fragile and you have to be so careful. So it becomes dangerous on many levels, the literal level, but then also possibly the metaphorical or fantasy or horror level. So, silver nitrate, just a very short summary. Basically, we have two characters. Montserrat is our main character. She is friends with Tristan. He has been a soap opera star in the past. He has this massive, terrible tragedy in his life where he was in a car wreck with his girlfriend at the time, Karina. She passed away very violently. He had to go through multiple painful surgeries. Tristan and Montserrat have been friends since childhood. Montserrat has a bit of a crush on him, but they have remained best friends. And in the current point of the book, it's been 10 years past the death of Karina, and Tristan is still kind of haunted by this, not just because he was blamed for her death and a lot of lies were kind of out about him and what happened, but also because he knows the real story and feels that he didn't act the way he should have acted in the situation. And so he's kind of haunted by it. And so our intro quote comes from Montserrat telling him that he basically created a haunted house out of his life and his actual body. But as the magic gets going, as they open themselves up to the dark forces, he starts being literally haunted by Karina. Tristan moves into a new apartment. His next door neighbor is Abel Urueta, a director who was he's elderly at this point. He was kind of a director of cult horror movies, classic horror movies that Tristan and Montserrat watched when they were kids because they loved them. And he kind of ended his career on this really disturbing note because he made this film called Beyond the Yellow Door that was never finished. And then practically everybody who was associated with that film had terrible things happen to them afterwards. So it ends up becoming this idea of a cursed film. And it turns out that he had been working with uh, basically a Nazi occultist who had been traveling to different places in the world and ends up in Mexico City. And his idea is that movies can be a kind of magic if you put spells, runes, and spoken word in a movie and you say them together with a powerful group, it then gets translated through this silver nitrate medium, the metal, etc., on a screen. Then everybody in the room is then complicit in the spell because you have the spectacle of the audience watching it. So it's also a cursed film because it's just a dangerous film. The spell was left not completed. They believe that the occultist is dead, but that's unclear now because Abel talks Montserrat and Tristan into helping him finish the spell because he thinks it will bring them good luck. And of course, it seems like that at first, but then everything starts to kind of fall apart as Montserrat starts to be haunted by the German occultist. Tristan is being haunted by his girlfriend, Karina. Abel is being threatened by his other fellow kind of occultists who all want the film for their own purposes. One is an aging silent film actress who pretends to be her own niece because she's supernaturally young because of what happened in the movie, Alma Montero. And then we have Claramon Bauer, who was the director's fiance who cheated on him with the German occultist. So it's very complicated, but I wanted to just throw out a few of the names of the characters and how they're connected. But I think listeners, you can see why we thought that this would be a good book to talk about for this particular topic. All right, so my first impressions, These are first impressions because I have owned a copy of this book probably since it came out because I was really excited to read it. And then, like happens to book nerds, we put books on our shelves and then we don't quite get to them when we think we will because things happen. And I also read for work, so it's constant reading. I did move recently and I ended up cutting back on my book collection, though you can't really tell. I know it still seems huge, but I did cut back a bit, downsize a bit on it. I kept Silver Nitrate because I knew I still wanted to read it. So when we were talking about how it would make a good example for the series, I was like, this is great. I'm going to get to read it. And I really enjoyed it. Silvia Moreno-Garcia has not really let me down yet. I very much enjoyed it. I want to keep reading her stuff. So that's my initial impression. Just it's another great book from her. Another impression would be something that I really loved about The Bewitching, her most recent book. She had a lot of horror history in there because she has an academic studying horror. And so there's all kinds of really cool pulp and classic horror knowledge that character has. And as a person who's kind of just a fan of the history of the genre, it's so cool to see that in a book. And in this, we have Montserrat and Tristan who love film, love horror films, particularly Mexican horror films. They're in Mexico City of the 90s. And, Montserrat works in film. She works in, what she terms at one point the boys club in the film industry of sound editors. And so she's kind of trying as the only woman working in the sound editing company or conglomerate or group to keep work, to keep going because she just loves this so much and is so good at it. And she in particular, and then when she's talking to Abel, they are just basically throwing like the movie knowledge back and forth. It's just really fascinating and cool. And, she also starts to explore witchcraft of the supernatural and magic and the occult and the unfortunate ties that the occult has to things like eugenics and fascist history. And there's just all sorts of stuff in here that I was like, oh, yeah, I remember reading about that or thinking about that when Lisa and I are working on Toil and Trouble or, reading about, the different histories of supernatural things. The epigraph for the book is from M.R. James's Casting the Runes, where the sorcerer is after an academic trying to finish this runic spell. So there's just so many things in this book that are basically things that I enjoy that it was just fun to read it. And I went back and forth between the audiobook and the book as needed. And sometimes I actually read the print book with the audiobook, which I've done now with one other book. And I like it. But like if I had to jump in the car, I could listen. The audiobook narrator is great. It was the same audiobook narrator as The Bewitching. So if you like The Bewitching audiobook, Silver Nitrate is also a good audiobook to check out. So Giselle Chipe does both. And yeah, I enjoyed listening too. Lisa, I feel like because I did my first impressions right after my brief, what is this about? I've been talking forever. So jump in and tell me what you think about this book.
I think you did a great job of taking a really complicated plot and making it something that is easily understandable, because you're right, there are a lot of characters in this book. There's a lot of subplots that are kind of weaving together. It is very complicated, but it's also compulsively readable. So that's one of the things I love about the book. I don't want to echo too much of what you said because I was nodding the whole time and I was like, yeah, that's about right. But listeners of our other podcast, the one Mel and I do together, the Monster She Wrote podcast, will know that, Silvia Moreno-Garcia is one of our like podcast favorite authors. We talk about her books a lot. And we laughed when we were doing this book because when we were in our planning stages for this series, and I had brought up this idea of like, well, what if we look at like cursed films, where the film itself is actually, it's kind of a meta thing that you can interact with in these horror stories. And I think it was you, Mel, who recommended this book. And all three of us, Matt included, had bought this book because we love it. We love the author so much, and none of us had read it yet. So I think you're right, all of us book nerds are kind of guilty of doing that. We've got a to be read pile that is a mile long, and I'm so glad we did this one. It's funny, I think I had several of her books, and I had deliberately put this one at the bottom of the pile, not because I didn't think I would like it, but I so associate her with the Gothic and kind of doing these takes on like I don't know, a modern contemporary update on Gothic novels. And this one seemed to me, I was like, oh, well, I knew it had to do with magic, and there was a lot of occult things in it, which I love. But I was just like, oh man, she's my Gothic go-to. Like, what am I gonna do if this isn't a Gothic book? And I should never have like doubted in the least because there's so much in here. Like, yes, I love the depth of film history that she puts in. And listeners, just to let you know, at one point she was talking about um the influx of Germans coming in the first half of the 20th century to Mexico, and how there was not only like people trying to introduce new ideas like Nazism, um, but also a huge influx of people coming in who had to do with the arts, and interacting with Mexican artists and Mexican filmmakers and all sorts of things. And I knew a little bit about that history from my art background. But I was just, as she was describing some of this in the book, I was like, oh, that it sent me down several rabbit holes. And like one of them, for instance, she mentioned Hilda Kruger, who was a German actress, and suspected spy who moved to Mexico. And sure enough, she's a real actress who I had never heard of before, but she did have ties to Goebbels. Apparently, he had somehow funded her. He was like a bit of a patron, I guess. And so I don't know if she was ever actually convicted of being a spy. I think it was more that she was a suspected spy. She eventually moved back to Germany, but that's how like deep the research goes in this book. It's not just horror film history, but it's kind of all kinds of film history. It's film history in general, going back to silent films, but it's the history of Mexico. There's an incredibly researched occult history, which Mel and I were familiar with when we did Toil and Trouble. Mentions of like Marjorie Cameron, Madame Blavatsky, and she also, as she has done in other books, she has done so well. I'm thinking about Mexican Gothic, and in particular Moreno-Garcia really kind of fleshes out the racial undertones and the racist undertones of a lot of this history. That a lot of, especially when you start bringing in the Nazi occult, but the occult just in general, that there was a lot of um eugenics basically that was going on. And you think about like Marjorie Cameron, for instance, the Scarlet Woman, and kind of this idea of um finding the quote unquote right person um to have children with, and who that might be and how they might look, that sort of thing. She does bring up, like, I don't think she mentions Dion Fortune by name, but she mentions like Fortune's um and her party, I guess, I don't know, her group of followers who tried to turn the occult against Hitler and stop his power. So she does mention that, but there's a lot of focus on how occult history has a lot of racist undertones that I think people don't always acknowledge. And so that was, I think, really interesting as she's diving into this like mix of like horror film plus magic history. Basically it hit a lot of the things that I'm really interested in, and it sent me down a lot of rabbit holes. Some I've been down before, some I haven't, so I really enjoyed that. And I will say this, um, I love it. I do love it when she does the gothic, but I also love it when she does the 90s. She did that with The Bewitching. That's 3 different timelines in that book, and one of them is in the 90s. This one is set at the end of 93, and so there's such fun touchstones of the history there. And kind of what's going on in the world. And I just really enjoyed that. Um, so yeah, I mean, I don't know why I had pushed that to the bottom of my to be read pile. I shouldn't have. I should have read this a lot earlier because I loved it. So, um, yeah, that's my first impressions. Mel, as we talk about this, what do you want to jump into? Because I kind of want to jump into the actual, since this is a series on cursed films, talk about the film that's in the book, the film in question, the one that Ueta was trying to make, Beyond the Yellow Door. So shall we talk about that film just a little bit and what's kind of going on there?
Sure, yeah, we can talk about that film. How do you want to approach it? Should we like just jump ahead to the screening and the trying to make the magic work, or talk a bit about the original setup?
Well, I guess I'll give a little bit of background in this since you talked about the characters a little bit. Beyond the Yellow Door was the last film that Ueta was trying to make, and he was doing it with Ewers, the occultist, and they had decided that basically that they could put the incantations and ruins and stuff in the silver that goes in the silver nitrate, and it would make it more powerful. And basically anytime you watch it, it would perpetuate the spell. And I think at one point in the book they talk about how certain like film stars, for instance, are remembered when others go kind of fade off into obscurity, and why that is. Like it has very little to do maybe with talent or looks, and it's more about how many people are viewing their films. And so this kind of idea that um which I do find really interesting, especially when you're talking about magic. But this idea that if everybody is, the more people who are engaging with something, the more the kind of legend grows around it. And that's how kind of real world magic works. But then in this case, they're also adding in the spells and the incantations and the runes so that they can get the runes. My southern accent is coming out strong tonight. I'm tired. Um, but yeah, they're trying to actually work in other things like eternal beauty or youth or money or love or power. So they're going to add all of that. It's not just lasting fame that they're going after. And I had noted in this particular one, um, that I was really intrigued from the very beginning because the name is Beyond the Yellow Door. And yellow, I am convinced, is the true color of horror. So I know if you were to ask somebody what the color of horror is, you think it would be like black or red. Black, obviously, you've got the goth aspect of it, red, blood, it makes sense. But when you really look at the history of horror, the color yellow pops up a lot. Um, you know, there's of course the yellow wallpaper, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and that being such a um sinister color in that story, where the woman who is suffering from postpartum depression basically gets locked into a room and she has nothing with her. Like she has no way to express herself either verbally or creatively, and she begins to see things in the wallpaper. And of course, yellow itself is not a very, I mean, it's a color of warning, right? That's why like school buses are yellow or taxi cabs are yellow. So you'll see them coming down the street. It's not a very soothing color at all. And then you have like, of course, Robert Chambers, The King in Yellow. You have the story Yellow and Red. I mean, you could go down this, but yellow really is the color of, I think, horror. It's also maybe because The King in Yellow, we mentioned in our last episode, was really the first kind of where I could pinpoint where you have this idea of like a meta text that is somehow cursed and can pass on the curse when you see it, read it, watch it, whatever. And so I think that that was a little nod to that. Um, Mel, I know you probably have some thoughts because we've talked about this, but what do you think of that? As my thesis, yellow being the color of horror.
Oh, I agree with you that yellow is one of, or not the color of horror. I mean, you're right, it is a warning, telling you to slow down or that something dangerous is there, which is something of horror. It's a shocking color. But I think, a lot of times, particularly if you're thinking of like, the mushrooms and some of the wallpaper in Moreno-Garcia's Mexican Gothic, or the yellow wallpaper in the yellow wallpaper, it's usually like this grungy, grimy, like sickly hue of yellow. Like there's like yellow that you could have on the walls of a kitchen or a bathroom that is lit up by the sun and maybe it'd be cheery. But then there's the yellow that we just know is like death and decay and just kind of gross and dirty looking. And I think that's the kind of yellow that pops up. I think it's also like, I don't know, it strikes me as like not an odd color per se, but a color that jumps out at you when it's in a story like this and kind of almost catches your attention. The other thing I was thinking about with yellow, and I told you this before we hit record, was that I did have the print book, and there's a bunch of really interesting material in the print edition that I have in the back. There's an extra really short story called Flash Frame that she says was not necessarily like an inspiration or that Silver Nitrate grew out of it, but it's about a theater that has been repurposed for different movies. And I think it's like a journalist is kind of investigating a story. But the first line is the sound is yellow. And it just catches your attention and kind of throws you off. And it could be because we've read all these things in horror that have the color yellow in it. But I think there is something kind of attention grabbing about it in that way. But in her author's note to Silver Nitrate, she talks about the title of the movie is like kind of an homage to uh, this idea. And you can also see the yellow door if you want to in the little interior cover. There's a movie poster of what it was supposed to be, which is really cool. But she talks about the King in Yellow a little bit. She mentions the yellow wallpaper, but I thought of the class that we took in graduate school so long ago, Lisa, because she talks about the romantic decadence and kind of laissez-faire of the Yellow Book, that British periodical that was published in the 19th century and published a lot of the romantic and decadent symbolist poets. And so I thought it was really interesting that she kind of built this like genealogy of like yellow horror and yellow decadence. And it just, I can see it in her work. In fact, she even says at one point that she feels like she went through a period of time where she was like in her yellow period in writing. But she mentions like, yeah, you may think that like green or black or something is the color of decomposition, but yellow is important there too. So I just wonder if there's something creepy and kind of gross about certain shades of yellow, but also like an attention grabbing aspect to it too. That would go with all these celebrities that you're talking about, or these wannabe celebrities who are trying to grab attention or power. Each of the people who spins the spell in the movie Under the Yellow Door, or Beyond the Yellow Door, has their own thing that they want. It's supposedly to give Alma her youth, right? And you have Evers using it instead to possibly make himself able to be resurrected, which is like the ultimate power. And yeah, like you said, the King in Yellow, it's about performance affecting people, and this is a movie that they were making to kind of create a cult, to affect a group of people and manipulate the world around them through magic, through that medium. So it fits perfectly with our theme, but also with a couple of the examples that we mentioned in our last episode.
Yeah, I thought about it when you were talking about it being the color of decay, and you can find that in nature, but also, maybe one of the most well-known uses of the color yellow in horror, but also one of the most forgotten, if that makes sense, is Frankenstein's monster is described in the novel as having like a yellowish hue to his skin, which of course changed after the movie adaptations because Universal's creature is very clearly green. And there's a lot of, I mean, I've got a Frankenstein um, print on my wall in my office where I'm recording this, and it's done in like green and blue. It's meant to be or I said that it's not. It's Dracula, but it's the Universal version is very like green, right? But in the book, he's yellow because yellow is that color of kind of decay, like you said. It's something we just don't think about. But yeah. Um it is interesting to me that everybody who was working on this film, like you said, does want something, which I know that sounds like of course they want something. That's why they're kind of doing this. But um because I feel like that's where Montserrat and Tristan can, or Tristan, again, Southern accent coming out tonight, but uh, I find that really interesting that that's where they can be the ones to kind of come up against it because in a real way they're the foils to the original three. So when they were making the movie, they decided that they needed two men and one woman, which echoes a lot of what we saw with like Marjorie Cameron and Jack Parsons and that whole Scarlet Woman um type of magic, Aleister Crowley type of magic where they felt like that's what they needed. And here we kind of see something similar where we have what's Ewers and Alma coming together to be the two men and the woman, which I think they explain at one point that it's supposed to be like a father, a son, and the like mother. Um and then you have Montserrat coming in to step in the role of the woman. You have Tristan, of course, and then you have Ruetta, who's come back, um, to kind of finish this out and hopefully reverse the curse because he thinks the movie fell apart when their kind of love triangle fell apart. He learned that his fiance was cheating on him and the funding got pulled, and so things never got finished. And because of that, that's why it was cursed. And everybody who went on to work or who did work on the film apparently met bad ends. They didn't all die, but maybe they didn't find work again, or they were hurt in some sort of way. Um, and so that's kind of where he thinks that the curse is going to lift if he can finish it out. Basically, he's like, this is a magic ritual left undone, and you don't want to do that. But I do find it interesting because when you have Montserrat and you have Tristan, they essentially don't want anything. And the way they are written, they could want something very easily, right? Like, and they're offered, they say, oh, to Montserrat, well, we can make Tristan love you. Like, we can give you that love. To Tristan, we can give you the career you've wanted. We can make you young again, which has been part of the problem, is because he's approaching 40 and he's like, I can't, like, I'm not this like young hot soap opera star anymore. Where am if I'm not that, what am I? Where am I? And everybody just remembers me for this bad thing that happened 10 years ago. Um and so I find that really interesting, that they have things that they could say, like, yes, this is what we desire, this is what they want. That's almost how they are able to not fall prey, I guess, to it. Especially because this type of magic requires blood sacrifice, and that's like a major thing in the ending of the book, is it requires that kind of violence to strengthen that magic. I don't know, I really liked the way that played out.
Yeah, I did too. Montserrat and Tristan, there's every opportunity for them to try to get what they want, but they're what's the word I'm looking for? Their groundedness, their realism, their disbelief at first, I think protects them. And also, Abel and Alma and Claremont, they were just dabbling. They didn't see the potential of what could happen until Claremont and Alma, and we forgot about Jose, but Jose as well. Um, they all get a taste of the magic, and Jose was already dabbling in it, so they have this magic. Montserrat and Tristan, they see the really disturbing ends. Like, they see what these people have been driven to. They see that it's death that strengthens the magic. Like, they see the really dangerous, disturbing megalomania. And I do like the way Moreno-Garcia teases us a bit with Montserrat's character. um, she does become kind of obsessed with Evert's work. She's constantly reading his book, and it helps them. It helps her manipulate the magic to protect them. But Tristan is basically like, this guy believed in eugenics. He murdered people. He was a Nazi. You don't admire him. And he's described in the book as a coward. He does run away from things. He has to face Karina, to face the thing that's been haunting him. But she has always identified with the monster and like charges forward. She beat the bullies when they were kids, and other kids made fun of her for her cane, because she had that injury and had surgeries, and made fun of him because he was, from somewhere else and his accent wasn't right, and these sorts of things. And so they themselves are kind of like opposites of each other. But they're also opposites of the people that they were playing, that they were standing in for when they finished the circuit. And so I think they've seen like the ends in a way that the others didn't. But going back to what I said earlier, I do think it's interesting that Montserrat is tempted about the power, and she tells Tristan at the end that she was, when Evers is like, help me bring myself back, and I'll, give you the power. She says at one point, when somebody is being, just really rude to her and mean, that she wishes she could do that spider spell and crush them, like crush your enemies. But she doesn't. And, I thought it was interesting that she was tempted but doesn't go there. I also thought it was interesting too that they take back the power of the magic. Like, this German occultist guy, he leaves Germany and travels around the world stealing basically indigenous knowledge, stealing other people's spiritual beliefs and magic. It reminded me a little bit of one of the characters in The Bewitching. This idea here with him, coming from his background and his political beliefs, is that he, as this, white man from Germany, he talks about the Aryan race a lot, is he can use this, for his own purpose. He can take this and make it better. So they often talk about how he does this mix and match of all these different systems and beliefs that he's kind of stealing from people and patching onto what he already knew as a child from his parents. And there's the stealing kind of appropriation side of that, where you're using things that you don't understand and he doesn't respect. And then there's Montserrat and Tristan, and particularly Montserrat, looking at it as she calls it a syncretic idea, where you kind of blend things to adapt and learn, and survive. And they kind of bring that back. Like, he would have never thought that people like Abel, who comes back as a ghost to help at the end, and Montserrat and Tristan could defeat him. But they can manipulate the magic so much better than him, because he was posing, he was using it for power, he was using it for self-aggrandizement, he was stealing it. And Montserrat and Tristan use their secret language from childhood to make the magic theirs and make up their own runes, and that makes them more powerful than him. Because for them it's kind of part of who they are, and they pull that power themselves, where he was just kind of posing and stealing things from everybody. And I thought that that was really an interesting way of looking at it, that they kind of stand up to the dangerous side of it in a way that the other characters weren't able to do, because like Abel and Claremont wanted what he had, and Alma, we're not 100% sure what she wanted, other than kind of like wealth and her youth. um but yeah, I thought it was really interesting that Montserrat was tempted, but in the end she doesn't do what Tristan was afraid of and kind of go to that. She kind of takes it back in a way.
Well, I think what Alma wanted was that supernatural facelift, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what she wanted. That, and to like electrocute people, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, at one point, I don't know if they exactly called it that in the book, but Tristan does kind of make fun of it when with Montserrat, when he hears about kind of what she wanted, that he's like, okay, so she just basically wants this kind of magical facelift. Okay. um yeah, no, I like everything that you said. They definitely, both of them had a personal journey in this book, where they had to confront things that they were not willing to confront before, both about themselves and about things about their past. And they find the courage together to do that, which was really nice. But yes, I love this idea of it was like an occult decolonization that was happening at the end of the book. You have the character of yours, who was, yeah, like you said, just kind of, he was going around and taking things that did not belong to him and using them for his own power, while also destroying the people he was taking it from. I mean, you look at somebody like you mentioned, like Jose, that you were like, oh yeah, Jose was there too. He worked on the original film, but he also knew a lot about magic, and so they bring him back to help. And he is instrumental, I think, in explaining a lot of this, and kind of helping them get through. But when you look at what someone like yours did, um he was using the people of Mexico, basically, not just for their kind of what he would have considered occult knowledge, um their spiritual practices, but he was also willing to sacrifice them to his own gain. And there's a lot of talk in the book about how the reason why that is because of how he saw people, of he saw people like him that were up on like the top tier, and everybody else was down below, and so it was okay to do that to people who were down below, which I found really interesting. And I do think that is an interesting uh development, I think, in the way people are talking about the occult now. And we talked about this a little bit in the end of Toil and Trouble, but this idea of decolonizing the occult and like really looking at who do these spiritual practices belong to and where should they remain and who should not be able to take part in that. So I did think that was really interesting. Plus, I just also want to give a little shout out to the fact that we do have, sorry, spoilers here for the very end. Obviously, Tristan and Montserrat, they defeat the the evil occultists, and they're able to come out on the other side. Um, they also have a nice little like love connection at the end, but then the book ends on Don't Fear the Reaper. Like, I don't know, to me that was just like chef's kiss. I was like, I could not have imagined a better ending to this book.
That was pretty much a perfect song to end on. It was pretty cool. I know you were just talking about the end of the book, but I just want to throw out one more thing that I thought was cool that kind of goes along with our theme. Loved, I don't know, I was disturbed by, but thought it was pretty sharp when, uh, basically, was it Claremont and the cult? Because of course the cult has remained and is really wants to watch this movie and get possessed or something. Bring the German occultist back from the dead, of course. Um, and I mean, they're killing people for sacrifice. It's terrifying. And Montserrat and Tristan are trying to like run a negotiation with him as to what they will or will not do, because like he can't complete the cycle without them, but they know he's probably not going to keep them around right after he's back. And so you have that kind of parlay between Montserrat and good old Wilhelm, um, in which he tries to, like, of course, dominate her and gaslight her and push her into doing his will. And she pretends, only for them to turn the tables on him, of course. But because he's still not fully alive, they actually run that small kind, like the projector that has the film in it, and it's just the pure kind of light of it right at that point. And she steps into it and almost goes into this like dream state, like a liminal space where she can talk to him. And I thought that was really interesting, like thinking about the medium of the cursed film, that it's not just that curses and spells were used to make the film, and the silver nitrate and the blood, the unhoused people he was murdering for the sacrifice, or was going to imbue it as well darkly, but also the people chanting with the film and everything. But there's also that liminal space of like the projection of it and the experience in the theater that was going to either work with the people as a cult or brainwash people into it. I thought that representation of the liminal space, with her only being able to meet with him at that point because he wasn't fully physical, was a really interesting way of representing that in between the connection between the movie and the people in the audience, which is part of that movie magic we talked about in the last episode, when it's not dark and crazy and a bunch of occultists, around you, but it gets turned to that propagandistic purpose because the dude was, a Nazi. But yeah, that representation I thought was a really nice way to work that negotiation, that communication there.
Yeah, that was a really incredible like sequence at the end of the book. I enjoyed it. Well, there's so much more that we could say about this book, but we did want to focus a little bit more on the actual like film inside of it. But if you read it, we would love to know your thoughts. We will be back next time, continuing this series. We're going to look at Paul Tremblay's book Horror Movie. But you can reach out to us and let us know your thoughts on this subject matter. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram. We also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. That's no, K-N-O-W. If you love what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com, or you can simply rate and review us, which is entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Theme music by Nicholas Gasparini, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.